all of these four things come down to the idea of timing. There's one thing that you really take away from this video. It's the idea that timing is one of the most, if not the most important aspects when it comes to regulation of your circadian rhythm, which is just the 24-hour cycle of which all of our internal physiology works off of, including our hormonal production.
Welcome to Gut Check Radio, the holistic health podcast where we explore the uniqueness of the human experience to help you navigate your health journey. I'm Nick Belden, a chiropractic physician and functional medicine practitioner. And you all know what's coming next, but the information provided in this podcast is for educational entertainment purposes only and is not intended to diagnose, cure, or treat any disease, and do not apply any of the information here without first speaking with your physician.
Welcome back, Gut Check Radio listeners, to the latest installment of the 13 tips to heal your thyroid. It's your host, Dr. Nick here, and we're going to be going on with day one. If you haven't listened, I would highly encourage you to go back and listen, where we talked about all the different types of testing and methods of assessment you can do to understand what's going on with thyroid function that go beyond just your standard TSH, free T4, which are typically the two most commonly run markers in a conventional healthcare setting. And on today's installment, we're going to talk about a topic I'm sure all of you might be all too familiar with, and that's the idea of sleep. And to some degree, you all probably become tired of hearing it, that sleep is important, and you fully understand that. And you hear all the beneficial things that sleep can provide for you, yet at the same time, you might be struggling with insomnia, whether it is going to sleep or waking up frequently or waking up to urinate or waking up and not feeling refreshed, waking up and feeling like you just got slapped in the head by a 2x4, all these mechanisms of feedback that your body is giving you to say, hey, something is being disrupted with your sleep. Something needs to be course corrected here. We need a different input into the system to get a different output. And I'm sure you out there listening have tried all of the things, right? You've tried CBD, you've probably tried magnesium, you've probably tried combinations together, and you're still sitting there wondering why, or probably even, how could I forget about this, melatonin. How is it that none of this has worked for you yet? Or how is it that you're worried about the negative feedback that you hear about melatonin once you start taking it? Do you have to take it forever? And then is it hard to come off? You're trying to find a more holistic and a truly natural way of obtaining it, rather than just relying on exogenous compounds, as I like to call it, or even of the natural variety. And I'm really going to give you all today 4 sleep tips that I think are transformative when it comes to your thyroid and really overall hormone, and really even above that, overall wellness. And all of these 4 things come down to the idea of timing. I want that. If there's one thing that you really take away from this video, it's the idea that timing is one of the most, if not the most important aspects when it comes to regulation of your circadian rhythm, which is just the 24-hour cycle of which all of our internal physiology works off of, including our hormonal production. So number one is probably my favorite, and it's the one I've seen be most transformative in my own practice and working with people. And it's also what I find the most neglected habit, and that's to obtain morning sun exposure. And I'm going to use the analogy here of a thermostat. So the way a thermostat works, and most of you are probably familiar with this, but it's just helpful maybe for setting the stage of what's going on here, is the thermostat reads the ambient temperature in the house or in the room. And then based on what you set the temperature to be, if you do set it, it will then try and create or remove that discrepancy. So say you have your house set at 70 degrees and the ambient temperature the thermostat reads is 74. It then sends a signal to the thermostat that it needs to start cooling. It needs to send cool air until the temperature hits 70 degrees, right? There's a discrepancy there that needs to be met. And sort of the same thing happens with our hormonal production in regards to light. When we wake up in the morning, our biology is regulated by the absence or presence of light. And there's many other things, but really light is one of the most important, and particularly light from the sun. So obtaining morning sunlight I always tell people, if you can get 5 to 10 minutes within the first 60 to 90 minutes of your day, you're going well above and beyond what probably the average human is doing in our society. And sort of what that mimics setting cool air into your house to be able to bring the temperature down from 74 to 70. So if you're trying to get your thermostat to start working, you need to have it be able to understand that there's a difference in temperature, and that in terms of our hormones, and specifically thyroid hormones, comes down to you obtaining sunlight within that first 60 to 90 minutes of your day. I can already hear some of you saying this. Nick, that's great. That's awesome. So cool. I wasn't aware of this. But there's just so many things going on in the morning. I got some young kids. I go to work first thing in the morning before even the sun is up. How do I even help regulate my rhythm if I can't even obtain morning sunlight? I'm going to give you all a couple options or a couple tips that I found that have been helpful for the population of people that I work with. Number one, if you're someone who there's so much running around in the morning, getting the kids ready for school, and you have to drive them off to school, and you have to sit in the waiting lines. I mean, it is insane how long some of these school lines, drop off and pickup lines are. But there's one convenient thing you can do if you have a car and you're in the drop off line, particularly in the morning. If you roll your window down, guess what you're getting? You're getting the signal from the sun. And then when you keep that window up, actually the glass sort of neglects, thankfully, actually, in other regards, the glass sort of diminishes the power that a lot of that frequency, that spectrum of light from the sun has in regards to regulating our hormones. So if you have your windows up, it can make things a little finicky and not be as powerful as if you either roll the windows down if you still have a manual car, which props to you if you do, or just putting your windows down while you're in the drop-off lane. It doesn't mean the sun has to be directly hitting you. It just means your body, particularly via your eyes, are getting the signal from the ambient environment that there is light. It's morning. It's time to get ready for the day. It's time to get charged and to start kicking off your hormones for success in the day. So that's another big one. Second, if you're someone who, say, the sun rises, say, in New York in the middle of January, December at 7:15, you're someone who has to be at work by 6:30 or 7. You're like, Nick, how do I even do that? Because I work in a factory and I can't exactly step outside for 5 minutes every now and then. I totally understand that. I work with that type of person. In this instance, you would want to regulate your circadian rhythm using other means, particularly a lot of the bright lights in your house. So I would turn on as many lights in your house as you could, be exposed to as much light as you could, and hopefully in the warehouse or whatever situation, office environment you're working in, will have enough of that artificial light, better than nothing. But you want to do other things to communicate to your body that it is morning time. And that's things such as exercise and food. So the presence of food early on in the day sort of depicts that the day has started. And also the initiation of movement, of exercise, is another input into the signal that it's time to get going for the day. So if you're the person who rolls out of bed, goes into your car, doesn't create any time for working out or breakfast, and just sort of makes their way into the office or into your place of business, and you just get going throughout the day, that's great. But I think if you can carve out the extra 15 or 20 minutes to even have a meal in the car, like a shake or something on the way to work, or even have some sense of movement, like a little morning walk, even when it's dark, even just getting some movement in that morning will help communicate to your body that it is time to rev up, get going, and will help create that optimal temperature, back to the thermostat analogy, that you want. Number two, I said light was the most important, is we want to obtain darkness in the evening. And this is a beautiful picture for those of you listening via podcast. This is a beautiful picture of a sunset happening. And we have a picture on the right. The picture on the right here is a graph of the circadian rhythm of TSH. Like we talked about in the first video, TSH is the hormone your brain produces to essentially tap your thyroid on the shoulder to say, hey, we need more or less hormone. So as TSH rises, that's your body's way of saying, hey, we need to make more hormone. We don't have enough. But if TSH goes down, that's sort of your body tapping yourself on the shoulder with only one finger instead of slapping them on the shoulder saying, hey, we're good. We got enough hormone going around. We can sort of slow down production. In this graph here on the y-axis, you have the actual levels of TSH in the blood. And on the x-axis, you have the time of day. And what I think is really important, what this graph highlights, is that there is a rhythm of TSH throughout the day. Generally, the peak of TSH actually occurs during the first half of sleep. So it seems sort of intuitive, and we'll get into, or counterintuitive, but why I think that can be, as TSH spikes during the first half of sleep. And it slowly reaches its lowest point in the day, probably right after you've been awake for about 5 or 6 hours. There's a little jolt or a spike in the day after you wake up, which to me, that makes sense, that right when you wake up, your body would want to start revving up for hormone production, like we talked about, via obtaining sunlight. But then we have something else fascinating going on here. Further on the x-axis, we have a normal night of sleep, and then we have a disrupted night of sleep, aka people stayed up during the night. You can call it shift work. And what they found was that there was a nearly twofold increase in TSH during the night when people stayed up, as opposed to when people slept normally from, say, I think it looks about 11 to 7. When people slept from 11 to 7, TSH slowly rose and peaked at about midnight, and then came back down and probably reached its lowest point at around 11 a.m. that day. What we find in the group that stayed up throughout the night is that there was a significant rise in TSH and then a very significant fall. So you have much greater variability in TSH. What does that mean for you? Energy swings, mood swings, lots of swings seemingly related to the fluctuations in your hormones. A lot of times when some of these feelings of fatigue, lethargy, lack of cognition, mood swings are attributed to the roller coasters of the coming down and coming up of whether it be blood glucose or hormones, particularly thyroid hormones themselves. So this is a really fascinating graph on that there is a definite circadian rhythm to TSH, and that if you stay up through the night, there is a significantly greater response by your brain and by your ultimate hormonal milieu, because there's a lot of stress going on if you're staying up throughout the night. So it's increasing its production because of that stress. And you'll feel that in the form of fatigue, lethargy in general. So obtaining darkness in the evening really helps to tell your body, hey, smart person, it's dark outside. Let's start altering our hormonal milieu to best align it with sleep, which means cortisol is going to start coming down. We want melatonin to gradually start building up and sort of peak as we head into sleep. And same thing, it seems, based on this paper from TSH here, is you have the bottom part of the graph here shows that it's the beginning of the night where TSH sort of rises. And if you miss that opportunity, there could be some effects in terms of energy and things that you miss out on. So number 2, obtain darkness in the evening. I think blue light blocking glasses are a great tool for this. If you can do the old Amish method of going down to candlelight, that's fantastic. But I also lived in the 21st century, so I'm more of a blue light fan. If you can do things like reading or dimming the lights, if you have that option in your house, those are also great strategies. But or if you can even be outside for maybe within the last 30 minutes of your day without a ton of your back door or patio lights on, I think that's a really good strategy to help down-regulate your nervous system, which will help regulate your hormonal milieu to best set it up for sleep. Number 3, nice and simple, keep it consistent. I always use this analogy for those of you who are parents, you'll appreciate this. For those of you who aren't parents yet, you'll appreciate this one day. Feeding our children or feeding your children. Kids love routine. They love routine of who they see, who they play with, what time they go to bed and wake up, which should tell you that we should do it too. But I think food is a great example. So say one day you feed your child at 10 a.m. and you feed them every day at 10 a.m. for about a week. That's 7 days. And then on day 8, you're like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to switch it up a little bit, and I'm going to feed them. I'm going to wait until noon to feed them. What do you think is going to happen during that 2-hour period where they were used to food at 10 and they get so accustomed to it, and then the one day you don't give it to them until noon? You're going to have a mess on your hands. They're going to be moody. They're going to have energy swings. They're going to be bouncing around everywhere in frustration. There might be some crying, might be some emotional outburst because they're so used to having food at 10, and then one day you gave them at noon. There's a degree of variability you want kids to be able to learn. So that's totally fine. And you also need to give them a foundation of habit routine. Our sleep is the same way. Say if you're waking up one day at 6, the next day at 10, the next day at 8, the next day at 7, next day at 5:30, and then you have a random flight you got to get up for, so it's 3:30. There's just a roller coaster of times you're waking up. So it's your body is being sent different signals day in and day out. So of course you're going to feel lethargic. Of course you're going to feel lack of energy. Of course you're going to have trouble putting on muscle mass because your hormonal milieu isn't stacked in a consistent manner. And from my experience in working with people, this habit is crucial. And it's one that it's very hard in the beginning, especially if you're someone who's used to sleeping in on the weekends. There's actually this idea called social jet lag, where sleeping in on the weekends actually throws off your ability to wake up then on Monday because, you sleep in 2 hours later than usual on Saturday and Sunday. It sort of takes an hour on average for our biology to catch up on a day-to-day basis, which is why if you travel 3 time zones, it takes about 3 days to fully acclimate. Or if you travel 3 hours of time zone difference, it takes about 3 days to acclimate. So essentially what you're doing every weekend is you're shifting it 2 to 3 hours, and then you're doing that 2 days in a row, and then you're it's taking you 3 days to catch up. So by the time you get caught up from your weekend sleep differences, it's Wednesday. And now you're having to do it again on Saturday. So there's just all this crazy things going on that really, if you can keep it consistent, and what I mean consistent, if people can have their bedtime and wake up times within the same hour window, from my experience, that really is what starts to move the needle and to help you have consistent bowel movements, consistent energy, and to be able to have that resiliency that you want to take on the demands of the day. So it really comes down to consistent bedtime, consistent wake up time. If you can alter your meal and exercise time to keep those consistent as well, that's all further information into your body, all further input. Things are moving well, hormones are well regulated, and the body is getting the routine that it loves. All right, number 4 and the last one, and that is to make your bedroom a sanctuary. I find a lot of times this one is one of the hardest things for people to do. Why? Because we love to do other things other than sleep and something else I can't mention in public in our bedroom. And that is, I'll give you an example. When I was in graduate school, I did everything on my bed. And don't get weird. I would study, I would eat, I would watch movies, I would do relaxing activities. I would do literally everything out of my bed because I lived in a 5-person house, rolling 3 bedrooms. So there was some movement and shifting and things at being in different places. It was just a crowded house, lots of stuff going on. I mean, it's grad school. You're trying to conserve a little bit. So because of that, I just did everything in my bed. And I had the most amount of struggle with sleep in graduate school. And yes, the demands of the cognitive stress load of graduate school played a significant role in that, but also because my bedroom was not a sanctuary. My bedroom was where I did everything. Whereas nowadays, the bedroom is for sleeping and something else that I'm not going to mention on this podcast. And since I've made that transition, as soon as I get into the bedroom, my brain is cued into that mode of sleep. And there's a couple other cues that we can use in the external environment to cue our brain that, hey, this place is a sanctuary. And the first is temperature. You've all probably heard about how you need to keep a cool bedroom, or maybe this is new to you. And when they've studied it, what they found is that the sort of the optimal temperature zone, I'm going to use degrees Fahrenheit for those of you in America, is 62 to 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Somewhere in that range is where they've really found that people get the most restorative sleep in terms of the ambient temperature. Or, so either set the ambient temperature, that actually use your thermostat, set it at 62 to 68 degrees, or obtain a device that keeps your mattress pad cool and can cool off your body. That could be a Sleep Me or an 8 Sleep device. These are amazing devices. This device has been one of the single best investments, probably top 3 or top 5, probably top 3 investments I've made into my health. And so it's a little pad that goes on your mattress pad that sends cool water, and you can set the temperature. So I set mine most nights between 55 to 60 degrees. And because of that, I can actually save money on the air conditioner bill, especially in Arizona when sometimes it's in 100 degrees even at nighttime. So by keeping the ambient temperature a little higher, and I can do that because my core body temperature is going to be kept cooler by that mattress pad, I can actually save money in the long run. I've done the math, and after about, it was anywhere between 8 to 11 months, I actually start to save money by, instead of having the thermostat set at 65, I can have it set at 75, but keep my mattress pad cool via the chili pad, and I can still get that restorative sleep. And lastly, this is the point I sort of mentioned in the beginning, and we'll put the links to 8 Sleep, Sleep Me, things like that in the show notes, is only do certain activities in your bed. I'm not going to reference all of them, but have your brain cue it. And some of you might be asking, how does that even work? Why would I bother with that? Do you have a home office? Do you have a place you go to work out? Do you work out in your kitchen? No. Do you eat in the same place that you work out? Do you like to do work in the shower? No. Why? Because your brain has attached those places with being specific places that you do things. So have work where you work, eat where you eat, work out where you work out, and sleep where you sleep. And that's another thing I've noticed from people is they tend to eat at the same place they work, which makes it easier to then work where you eat. And you sort of have this you don't have this separation of activities based on where you are. So ideally, like I said, you'd have your beds for sleep, kitchens for cooking, dining room for eating, gym for working out. But if you do everything at every place, your brain is just playing a guessing game all day, which then makes it harder to get that much into deep and restorative sleep. So the most important theme from today, to regulate your thyroid, to regulate your energy, to have that resiliency to take on the demands of the day. If you can manage these 4 things of morning sunlight, evening darkness, keep it consistent, make your bedroom a sanctuary, those 4 tenets are going to go a long way toward regulating your thyroid and giving you that bounding energy that you want.